Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. So, as we all know, the US midterms are fast approaching, and there is a growing speculation surrounding voter decision, as also highlighted by Takshila Institution's new midterm elections racebook tool. So, hi and welcome. I am Bhumika Sevkani. I will be your host for today's episode, and to discuss what the American voters care about in the coming elections, I am joined by my colleague Abhishek Kadiyala, a research analyst at the Geostrategy program studying the US, their domestic politics, and how that impacts India as well, right? So, welcome, Abhishek.
Thank you, Bhumika, for having me here. It's a pleasure always.
Right, Abhishek. So I remember from our conversations, and that was also the wider conversation going around, right, during the Iran war on how that will impact Trump's midterm elections and how that could also pressurize Trump into sort of either reducing the intensity of the war or stopping it, right? But yes, you have studied the past voter records as well. And so if you could just, from your racebook observations and from your other readings, let's just zoom it out for our listeners a little, right? First, so let's just start by understanding the past trends and what have been those broader trends that determine voter decision making in the US congressional elections.
So, US congressional elections have been an interesting topic because they have had their last major reform in the 1990s, the mid 90s to be specific. And be it both in terms of voter rolls, be it redistricting, or even a resurgence of the Republican Party in the Congress. Right. So since the 90s, if we look at the midterms, we have only had two instances in last 30 years where the president has seen some amount of success in holding on to the Congress, be it the House, be it the Senate. And that is the nature of the midterms and in the broader trend that the president always suffers in the end, because midterms, especially in terms of the US Congress and not the state level Congress or the state level governmental elections, if you look at US Congress in particular, it is generally a referendum on the president. It is considered that, and that also explains the term midterms, right? Because it is the middle of the president's term, and it is this nature of midterms that has been consistent since the 1990s, because most of the parties have also become extremely polarized since the 90s as well. So that trend is seen in this particular case. Now, another important trend has also been that as and as more polarization occurs, as and as elections are determined by party loyalty and not exactly policies or individual members standing up and their profiles, the more polarization we see, the more importance to national issues is also given. Generally, a lot of elections are usually determined by, supposed to be determined by a lot of local level issues. And local level problems that connect the constituency to the federal policy making. But as we see more and more polarization, the trend here is that more and more national issues are pushed up front. This election is a little bit different because there are some polls that show that more people care about local issues, because there is enough diversity slowly emerging within the parties, be it the progressives versus the more moderates in the Democratic Party, or the conservatives or the MAGA crowd in the Republicans. That differentiation is seen. So a lot of voters are saying that domestic issues or local issues are what might determine their voting stance. But this is not to say that issues that are of national importance are not percolating into a lot of these domestic issues. So that kind of secondary impact is what we are seeing of the national issues, despite voters not viewing it directly as determining their vote. So these are the two broad trends of the 2026 going into the 2026 midterms. Bhumika.
Right, Abhishek. I think those are some important trends that you mentioned, right? And you also mentioned that national issues have seemingly dominated the electoral outcome since the 90s, which also sort of gives us an idea about the coming midterms and what to look for. But just to be more specific, what do you think are some of the key national issues in this midterm election?
So, in this midterm elections, there are four broad important national issues, which I also call my four eyes of US midterms. Those are primarily inflation, institution, Iran, and immigration, right? Because if we look at the broader statistical data and survey results for the coming midterms, a primary issue that most people cite about their decision in this election is the issue of inflation, growing prices, and the broader economy as a whole. And then we also have institutional mistrust that has been among the top two of people's concerns for almost last decade and a half since the Obama era, because institutional polarization and increasing partisanship in the institutions and a sense of growing mistrust against US institutions. Again, US is a country that is known for its resilience because of its institutions, and that is all the more reason why people are so concerned about any kind of tampering or any kind of suspicions that arise in relation to the institutions, right? So this has been a constant important point that has been consistently existing, and this also shows why people are or seemingly more concerned about local issues as well, because they believe that their votes, especially at a local level, especially at a state and a gubernatorial level, might result in better changes than at the national level, which they already view as, say, inefficient and maybe even corrupt, right? Then we have the issue of the Iran war. Now, Iran war is a very broad topic that has touched economy, that has touched institutions and everything. So that is why Iran is included as one of the eyes. And then lastly, it's immigration. Immigration is among the shorter topics in the broader context, but it still plays a very important role in determining and takes points from the remaining two of institution and the Iran war broadly. And broadly views as the institutional failure as well. So these are the four eyes which I believe are determining the upcoming US midterm elections.
No, right. I think of the four eyes that you mentioned, I think inflation would be something that might always come up as a sensitive subject around any election, right? But maybe particularly more around this one. But this institutional mistrust, I think that is an interesting lineup there. And so, just to start on these four factors, and let's start with the first one itself that you mentioned about inflation. So, how do you think that this percolates into the several local issues faced by the constituents across the US, especially given that we've seen the Trump administration make several cuts in fundings for healthcare as well as education. So, how do you think that the voters are perceiving that, and how does that impact their understanding of the inflation?
Yes, so if you look at something as important as healthcare, healthcare is a subject that has, since US is a federal country, healthcare is an issue that has been also has a strong roles for the states to play, right? If you look at it from that perspective, the states that are facing the issue of a major healthcare crisis in the US in terms of costs and efficiency, these states are the ones that are suffering the most, and a lot of them view it as coming from the top down and not just as a result of state policy. One of the important things that Trump administration did earlier in his term is very strongly refused to extend the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act premiums, which has led to a major issue within the US, where a lot of people who are dependent on Obamacare are suffering because of this. And a major addition to this also is the announcement of $1 trillion dollar cuts across 10 years, which will impact 11 million people in the Medicare area. These are important areas where Democrats tried to take a stand, but eventually failed, and which resulted in the passing of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. earlier in Trump's administration, right? So this is one major point where the issue of economy started, and since then Trump's approval rating on economy is increasingly declining, and it is among his worst figures with about minus 34 net approval on economy. So that is about the healthcare point of view. The second important point of view is also tariffs, right? If we look at what people on the above say, the economists and the politicians, especially from the Republican Party, most of them have surprisingly surprised by the fact that tariffs have not impacted the US economy as much as they're supposed to. And US inflation as a whole has remained near average up until the Iran war. It has been so US historical average has been about 3.2, and under Trump it has been around 2 to 3 up until the Iran war began. But the issue is that most people, especially during the 2024 campaign, Trump administration has promised not limiting inflation as such, but had promised a decline in prices as well, because most of the inflation that has been coming since COVID has already led to sky high prices for very basic goods in the US, and that is what Trump administration promised to reduce when they were coming into power, and these prices have not reduced at all. And a lot of people, just in terms of rhetoric and symbolism, are tariffs for it. That is broader public perception, which obviously is not entirely based on facts, but purely on public perception. With if you look at Trump's the tariff approval rating, which is about 38%. 38% of the people approve of Trump's tariffs. So that stat tells us something about what people basically blame for the inflation as a whole. Second important metric is also a lot of small businesses in a lot of across the US have suffered because of this, and it has spread across the economy because of the supply chain dependencies as a whole. A lot of businesses have absorbed the cost. A lot of businesses claim that they have absorbed about 60% of the cost and things like that. But they believe that they will not be able to continue doing it for the times to come. And this has also contributed to the broader discussion that Trump administration's tariffs have led to inflation. And another important element also coming to inflation has been that Trump administration, if he, the broader disapproval rating of Trump administration has also been in terms of rhetoric. The firing of the Fed chair and all the controversy surrounding it, be it the tariffs as a whole, or be it the impoundment, wherein Trump administration basically did not spend the money that was given to him, which is called impoundment. Uh, because of things like Department of Government efficiency cuts, Doge cuts, which was run by Elon Musk, and things like that. Those kind of things have also contributed to this imagery of a bad overall economy. And all of this was stopped when the Iran war finally arrived and energy prices suddenly hiked. And this spread across the economy. And that destroyed his broader credibility on the economy as a whole, which was already in decline since the tariff announcements, right? So that's what led to the 63% disapproval rating of Trump on economy that we see today. Yes.
Right, Abhishek. So I think all of the things that you mentioned, especially the inflation going up after the Iran war, after Trump's imposed tariffs, and this just takes the Trump's term up until now in a completely different direction to as opposed to what he had promised, right? So, but yeah, there was also all of this then leading to a more distrust in the institutions, and I think institutional mistrust in a country like the US is not something that you would so often, so sort of repeatedly hear. And we also saw that when the Supreme Court tried to take a stand against tariffs. We also, I think, discussed in one of the earlier podcasts about the US Congress trying to stop the Iran war or sort of, influence Trump's decision in the other direction. But again, that could you just explain more on this institutional mistrust, and is it not institutional reliance that is usually expected from the US?
So it is true that obviously the Supreme Court has tried to, oppose Trump administration's actions, or the U.S. Congress has also tried to oppose Trump administration's actions. But I think it is the impact of these actions that has been leading to the institutional mistrust, right? For instance, if we take a look at the Supreme Court decision that basically outlawed Trump's use of International Emergency Powers Act, IEPA, for imposition of tariffs. It was done, and Trump administration obviously did not like it. They issued a statement. He gave a speech, but he did accept it. And in that very speech, he announced a reroute through which he'll be imposing the same tariffs again through section 323 of Trade Expansion Act 1964, section 301, and section 112 of the 1974 Trade Acts. He has basically used these to circumvent the stops that Supreme Court had put on him to reimpose the tariffs again on all the countries that were listed here. It is important to note that both of these sections, like all three of these sections through which Trump reimposed his acts, were actually the Congress delegating its powers to the administration back in 60s and 70s. And this is also the broader theme of building institutional mistrust in the US politics, right? Because something that was done in 60s and 70s, eventually leading to Trump continuing his sanctions, going behind the institutions and going behind the legal frameworks and legal institutions, is something that is a symbolic representation of the broader institutional mistrust as a problem lying here. And this is clearly the issue of presidential overreach as well. And it is an important point for Republicans as well, because obviously Democrats would not want, Trump to do certain things and all of that. But a lot of Republican supporters who are behind, the Republican Party and the Trump administration, they are also strong advocates of the US Constitution. There are a lot of them are constitutionalists as well. And this kind of blatant disregard for separation of powers, or constitutional duties, is also something that reflects on their stance in the coming elections, right? So a lot of them obviously might not vote for Democrats because of their partisan takings, but they might choose not to vote at all, which will hurt someone like Trump, especially in key battleground states in the coming elections, like be it Florida, be it Texas, or be it California, which also has a lot of conservative districts emerging, right? So even for the war power resolution, if you look at the clauses, none of the clauses prevented Trump administration from waging war, or they did not have essentially the power to do that. And Congress still continued to fund the war despite raising protests. But even the acts in of themselves, all of them basically said that in all versions, it was okay for Trump to continue using the powers against Iran, despite it hurting the popular sentiments, because popularly the Iran war was very famously disapproved of by majority of Americans. And and all these three bills stated that it was okay for Trump administration to continue use of force in Iran if they sought congressional approval, and he got it. And that kind of rhetoric is also something that voters clearly understand and they did not approve of. And then adding on to this was about US Congress has, especially only the Senate, has passed the War Powers Resolution Act twice, the second time being around this week. After obviously the hostilities have seemingly ended, in at least in terms of US involvement, right? And both of these have come after the ceasefire announcement and the negotiations started, right? So all of this comes off as symbolic, and all the failures that happened before, all the pushing down bills that had the ability to be passed later, in the timeline, using the Easter holiday as a the holiday in between, the 2 week holiday, as a particular clause for postponing the vote. All of this was seen very clearly by the voters as Congress disregarding the popular sentiment, and sending their children to war, or risking sending their children to the war. So all of this was observed. Another important element that came right before the Iran war was the Epstein files. Right, Epstein files has a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding it regarding foreign involvement, deaths, and institutional corruption, all of that. But one thing that was completely undeniable was the reluctance within the U.S. Congress and the administration as a whole in giving the people confidence regarding the handling of these files. All the important names of the perpetrators that were hidden, all the names of the victims that were leaked by these documents, all the documents that still remain hidden, all of these raise questions against the administration. And Epstein files, I very strongly remember those days when it was just a conspiracy theory, and most of the people did not particularly believe Epstein files and all of that, especially the Democrats. And a fringe group of Republicans very strongly believe that it should be released and all of that. From there to today, it being one of the important elements of determining institutional trust, it has come a long way. And without long cases of institutional mishandling of the files in the last year, this would not have been possible. And today, only 47. Trump's approval rating of over Epstein files is also pretty bad, because only 34% of Americans believe that Trump handled the Epstein files in a considerable manner. And a lot of them very strongly believe that Trump was actively also involved within the Epstein files. Although there is no direct evidence to it yet, his involvement was there. But compared to others, on a comparative basis, if you look at this, his involvement, despite there being no evidence for this, the rhetoric is very strongly ingrained in the minds of voters. And as we had discussed, again, the role of the president is also what generally determines the midterms as well in today's era, where partisanship and national issues are, being considered as the important decision-making points for voters.
Right. Just on this topic of Epstein files that you brought up, Abhishek. So, how come Iran is one of your factors, but Israel is not included in these factors, especially given after, of course, the Iran war and the US supporting Israel in this war?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, because I also thought of including Israel as a whole. But the reason I did not include Israel as a whole is primarily because of Iran war. Uh, because Iran war is a broader subject that covers institutional mistrust, that also covers economy, right? Because if you look at Iran as a topic, before Iran, inflation was not a big problem on paper, right? Because core inflation remained considerably manageable. Core inflation, in the sense, inflation that does not include food and energy prices as a whole. But hardline inflation also remained consistently stable under the Trump administration, despite the tariffs. And despite it impacting day-to-day people and small businesses. But after the Iran war, the pinch was real, because the inflation was going sky high. It went to a point, it crossed the US historical average and entered the 4.2% mark, which was pretty dangerous for the Trump administration as a whole. And it resulted in gasoline spikes of nearly 40% in different areas. And this led to about 11% of Americans naming the Iran war as their top issue, right? Um, Iran war also has two other elements. First is, botching our foreign policy by not only the administration, but by the US Congress as well, because Congress was literally taking no action despite knowing that Trump was about to launch the war in throughout January and February, when the discussion was at its peak. And even after launching of the war, up until the ceasefire arrived, there was no tangible action within the US Congress. If anything, Congress was running away from putting key bills to vote. And this was done by members of the Democratic Party themselves. So that led to a broader institutional mistrust. Even partisan loyalties is something that can be overridden by a issue like this. And obviously the role of Israel lobby was something that was highlighted in this very clearly, because the influence of this foreign lobby was the reason a lot of Democrats were regularly voting against this bill, making not putting down bills that would eventually benefit Israel in certain ways. That would even the 30-day clause that they included, it was supposed to guarantee US support for a period of 30 days. But that eventually did not come because the war went beyond 30 days, and the mission of the bill, with the point of view of pro-Israel members, was defeated. So these kind of things were also what made the Iran war important here, right? Another important element is, the broader local fears about the Iran war, because there were instances where just around the time where before the ceasefire, where Trump administration threatened to annihilate, Iranian civilization, a whole civilization would die tonight. Quotes of coming from Trump's social media posts. During that time, there was a classified briefing held within the US Congress, from which, according to news reports, even a lot of major MAGA Republicans stormed out, because there were serious discussions about a potential ground invasion. If that would happen, a lot of American civilians would directly be impacted, because a lot of their family members, friends, people whom they would know or care about would serve there. And America is also a country which is very sensitive about their tax dollars, right? And spending their tax dollars in this foreign quagmire is also something that will definitely be looked upon. So that is where Iran stands a determining issue, right? So even today, when there is entire discussion going on around the peace deal being good or not for the administration, a lot of Americans are, irrespective of viewing this as a victory or defeat for the US, a lot of Americans are welcoming the peace deal because they want this to end irrespective of US symbolically winning this or not. So that is the significance of Iran war in the midterms.
On these sort of external commitments, right? I mean, it was one of the main issues during Trump's campaign that he would pull out of all of the external commitments, including wars like this, right? But then he still went ahead with the Iran war, and they saw gasoline prices going above $4 a gallon, which I think is a record high after 2022. But then, yes, after the deal now, I think it has started falling below $4 again. So, but coming to your last factor, the last I that you mentioned, Abhishek, which is immigration, right? Could you tell us more about how is the general or wider perception on immigration in the US? Because not long ago, we have been seeing, and I think we continue to see these anti-immigrant sentiments arising in the US, right? But then there's also been this opposition domestically of Trump's handling of immigration with some of the deportation practices and other things, right? So what does your analysis say about how much of this issue will impact the midterms, and how is the wider perception regarding immigration right now?
Yes, so regarding immigration, Bhumika, one common misconception is that a lot of anti-immigration sentiment is driven by xenophobia, which obviously there is data that opposes that. A lot of it is not driven entirely by xenophobia, because there's a strong support base for legal immigration in the US as well. But if you look at how both the parties frame, the issue of immigration, we can get a better clarity on the topic, right? Because Democrats call these immigrants who have come into the US without due process as undocumented immigrants, whereas the Republicans call them the illegal immigrants, or as Trump does, illegal aliens of sorts, right? That speaks a ton about where the real voter base of the issue of immigration lies. It lies in the people who are law-abiding citizens who believe in Constitution and US legal systems and also institutions, right? And that is where Trump administration got the issue of immigration wrong. People want him to be strong on immigration, not because they're xenophobic, because they want people to abide by the law of the land, right? And deporting immigrants without due legal process by by excesses in federal authority, by excesses in presidential authority, doing this is hurting the legal and constitutional frameworks as much as illegal immigration does, according to a lot of people. And that is where issue of immigration is hurting Trump, because 58% of Americans, according to latest surveys, oppose Trump's handling of immigration, right? And only 39% of them approve of ICE's enforcement of immigration. There's a major opposition, especially among Democrat states, against ICE. And even among key Republican states, there is strong opposition regarding ICE, right? Uh, and the primary reason is that they are crude. They have their recruitment standards are low. The training standards are considered very low, and their broader operation is something that is considered as an extension of their given mandate as immigration and customs enforcement agency, right? So that is where the issue of immigration is becoming a key electoral issue. It has obviously the legal aspect of it in terms of institutions, but it also has this entire discussion about how it is also a state versus federal authority discussion, because Trump has threatened to enter a lot of what we call safe haven cities, safe havens for illegal or undocumented immigrants, where he wants to send ICE and deport them as well. And whenever ICE enters in these cities, there is mass protests and there is popular resistance. Even in a lot of states, a lot of the government itself, be it their Congress or their governors, they have seen strongly opposing the ICE. And a lot of states where ICE was about to enter, a lot of governors from there too have threatened, taking actions against ICE. There were a few, Republican states like Florida as well, where there was a hint that they are not really happy with, Trump administration's enforcement of deportations, right? So this is beyond the general institutions. This also translated to a state versus federal authority discussion. And obviously, courts have done well to step in and put some restrictions on the ICE agency here. But the broader issue is that how has Congress approved this entire process back in the early Trump administration, July of 2025, under the one again the villain for all, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, right? So this funding by Congress is also seen as something that surpasses or creates a bad reputation for institutions as a whole. So if you look at immigration, it covers this broad dimension of institutional mistrust that can be studied on its own. And because a lot of legal immigrant families who have been naturalized citizens in the US are also voting in this election, and a lot of constitutionalists also play a strong role in this election, immigration is becoming an issue in of its own, and is part of my four eyes, let's say.
Yeah, Abhishek, no, I think that's an important insight to capture in terms of immigration, about that despite this wider sort of anti-immigration wave that we saw, the people are now sort of criticizing Trump's handling of immigration, especially ICE, the enforcement agency that you mentioned, but also this demographic change that you mentioned towards the end, right? That a lot of sort of families of these immigrants who are now born as US citizens will also be voting. So that also sort of showcases a change in the demography that could impact. But yeah, all in all, I think this has been an interesting conversation, Abhishek. And with that, we come to an end to this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us your analysis. And also thank you to our listeners for tuning in. And for those who are curious to know more about this topic, do check out Takshashila Institution's midterm race book, and also Abhishek's Substack that he regularly publishes called the DC Dossier, where he tracks domestic US politics developments that impact India specifically. Both of these are linked in the description below. And yeah, thank you, and stay tuned for the next episode.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.